Hi, and welcome to The Storied Human. This is the first of 3 interviews I'll be doing with women who started in technical careers in the 1980s, and that was not an easy thing to do. And they have stories to share about how they made it work. It's really interesting to hear how successful they were and what they had to come up against. And I really think it's important to share their stories, to hear about how much things have changed, but to also help encourage young women who are thinking of going into technical careers. So this is my series called Women in Tech. I'm lucky enough to know 2 of these women. I worked with them for 4 years at Liberty Corner, New Jersey, and they worked with each other for longer than that. And I really enjoyed talking to them individually. And then we're going to finish the series with a group interview. So it's been really fun. I'm Lynn Thompson, and I'm here with Elissa Matthews. She's a friend and a former colleague of mine. She worked at Bell Labs as a mathematician and systems engineer. Now she heads up the communications department at an engineering firm, and she's a published novelist. She's super interesting to talk to, and I think that we can learn from her about what it's like to be a woman in a technical field, which has its own challenges and rewards. So welcome, Elissa.
Thank you very much. Hello, Lynn. I am just completely pleased and flattered to be here.
Well, I'm flattered to have you. It's just so fun because I've admired you and the other women we're going to include in this series for a really long time. I've just enjoyed you, and it's so fun to give you this spotlight because I think you have a lot to tell us. I mean, I've been talking to you and learned things I didn't know, and I've known you for a while.
A while indeed.
So the first question I have, I like to start with how somebody was raised. What were their influences? What typified maybe your childhood? And I like to finish with, who was the 8-year-old you? Like, what did she like? What was she like?
Interesting question. I think I have to say that what I learned growing up were actually negative lessons. That is, they were lessons. I learned a whole lot of things that weren't, if you will, weren't the way the world doesn't work. My mother had some very severe mental health issues. She never really saw me. Understandable, I suppose. But what I learned very early on is that the image other people had of me was not always valid. And I learned I had to find my own image of myself by assembling bits and pieces of what was true. And I very early on, I had to learn how to distinguish what was true about myself from what wasn't true about me beliefs that other people held. I also grew up in a very white, very Christian, very Catholic community. And my family were the only Jews in the zip code. I certainly was the only Jewish girl in school. But I spent summers with my grandparents in a Jewish community in upstate New York. So, like many other bicultural children, I learned that the rules of behavior, that is, the stories that we're talking about, the stories are not universal. They're situational. Mm. And I think this really served me well in life at work, in that I never rebelled against the stuff I had to do at work or the stuff I had to do to be a woman in a man's world, because, wearing the stuffy suit, not talking about what I wanted to talk about, but, being somewhat straight-laced or not laughing at the smutty jokes, or telling the smutty jokes, because the clothes I wear and the rules I follow, they're not me. They are costumes. So who I am is not what I do. And who I am is not how well I do it. And who I am is not what other people think of me. Who I am is who I am and what I think of me. So that was my background, learning what wasn't in order to learn what was.
I'm just amazed that you could learn that, because all those things are tough. Being the only Jew in school, having a mother with mental health issues, there's a strength there. I mean, did you have a closer relationship or a good relationship with your dad?
Not with my dad. My dad wasn't around a lot, but I would say I had a wonderful relationship with my grandmother, with both of my grandmothers, actually. I had a wonderful relationship with my grandmother. I have siblings. I wasn't a lonely child. I mean, friendships were a little weird when some of the kids weren't allowed to play with you, but like I said, anti-Semitic town. But I had siblings, I had aunts and uncles, I had cousins that lived down the road. I have a wonderful, warm, loving family, perhaps too much so in that they protected my mother rather than getting her help. But no, I had support around. I had wonderful teachers and wonderful friends and wonderful friends.
Yeah. And I think
I learned little bits from each one of them, and I still have wonderful friends.
I just love that. And the support network is huge because then you can handle parents that aren't maybe there for you in the way you'd like, as long as someone is, or there's a few others, right? My mother used to talk about that. My mother had a mother who had to go to a mental hospital for a big chunk of her childhood. And my mother lived with her grandmother. She and her sister moved right in with her dad's mom. And that's the way it used to be, where families were there. They were ready to pick up the pieces. They lived close by. It's not as prevalent now. But my mother said, as long as someone's there, it doesn't have to be your mom, and I think that's really significant. So tell me about 8-year-old Elissa.
Well, what else is there to know about 8-year-old Elissa?
What did she like to do?
What did Elissa like to do?
Yeah.
Elissa liked to get things right.
Ooh.
So she liked math homework and she liked puzzles and games. And she liked, oddly enough, for the time, she liked tennis because getting the serve in the box was important. And she liked running. I loved running. I still love running.
That's so cool.
I'm not as good as I once was, but I'm not as fast as I once was. But I liked things where I could get it right.
Yeah.
So
that love of precision, even as a child.
Yeah.
And
knitting and not so much crossword puzzles, honestly, although they were okay, but definitely math problems.
Yeah.
Definitely math was always my favorite subject.
So that's so cool that you ended up doing something that your 8-year-old self would have approved of, right? Because we don't all do that. Sometimes we get far away from our 8-year-old selves and we have to go back and say, what did I used to like? So that is really intriguing that you always, it also strikes me that you had control over those things. You didn't have control over the way things might have been at home, but in these arenas, there was a way to control.
That's a really interesting point. A little off topic here, so cut this if you need to. Years ago, and I'm going to say this was in the 80s, one of my absolute favorite book was a book by Walter Tevis, who also wrote The Hustler and a couple of other screenplays and movies, but it was a book called Queen's Gambit, which has just in the last couple of years finally come out of all the legal turmoil it was in for 20 years. And they made it into a Netflix series, which was just wonderful. But the premise of that is that there's this girl who is an orphan and her life is completely out of control. And she takes one look at a chessboard, which is laid out in a black and white 8x8, completely squares inside of squares, completely regulated grid. And she says, I want to learn to play that game.
So cool.
It has to do with, and somebody asked her later on. So when you were 8 and you learned how to play chess, what was it? She said it wasn't the chess, it was the chessboard.
Yeah.
I wanted my world to be that orderly.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. So of course you would be extra attracted to that. No, I like that. I don't think we're cutting that. I like that.
For
So,
years, my hobby was getting old calculus books and doing the problems and shading in the volumes of rotation and the volumes of axis rotation. And yeah, sorry.
you're a math nerd. You are.
I'm a math nerd. It's the precision thing.
But
there's a right answer. There's a right answer.
There's a right answer.
I love that. Theoretical math. But the math that had answers.
And there's only one, right? There's only one right answer. Because somebody said to me recently, there's a lot of right ways. You just have to choose one. That's like real life, right? There's a lot of right ways.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of right ways, but there's only one answer. There's a right is good enough. I'm okay with good enough, but there's only one right.
There's only one. There's only one true.
There's only one
true ring, right?
There's a whole lot of good enough answers, but there's only one right answer.
So tell me about what you went into, like when you went to college. How did you pick your major, and what was that like? Because you were in a technical major, right? You were in math.
I was a math major.
How many women?
I went to a college. I went to Union College in Schenectady, New York, which is a wonderful engineering school. It's also a wonderful pre-med school. And I went pre-med because people told me I should be pre-med. It lasted a hot 6 seconds when I was at Union because there was no pre-med major. And so I had to pick a major. I picked math because math was my favorite subject. And I got into some bio classes, some chem classes, some pre-med, I hung out with and I went, I don't like pre-med. I don't like the people I'm with. I don't like sick people. I certainly don't want to be a surgeon, a proctologist, a gynecologist. It's messy, it's dirty, and the people are sick. I couldn't imagine a worse career for me.
Well, it's not very precise.
And it's not precise. It is not precise. It's messy. Yeah. And I kind of looked around and I said, well, what am I going to do? Well, I was a math major. So I just kind of went along with being a math major for a while. And then I discovered computer science. And from that point on, and I discovered symbolic logic and predicate calculus and logic and programming and data structures. And I was in love, and I've been in love for 45 years, and I've never fallen out of love with programming or with code or with logic, with coding logic. It's just completely me. And that's what I did. I ended up at an engineering school by happenstance, but it turned out to be exactly the right place.
The right thing. So was it okay that you were one of the few women, or what did that feel like?
It was, yes, I think I was the second woman in a math major at Union. They had just turned co-ed. So when I was a freshman, the graduating class of the first class of women accepted to Union were seniors. So they were still around. I was like the second woman math major. I often walked into a classroom and I was the only girl there. It was like being the only Jew in the third grade classroom, in that I learned to ignore it. And I learned that this too shall pass. They'll stop thinking about me as a Jew. They'll stop thinking about me as a girl. I love that quote that I'm going to say Eleanor Roosevelt, but it probably isn't. It's probably nobody. It's probably a t-shirt. What other people think of me is none of my business.
I love that.
I love that quote. Another friend of mine, for years I went around, another friend of mine says, fuck them if they can't take a joke.
It's true. It's true.
And I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do, to say I'm just not going to think about what they think of me, but I am saying it's possible. Yeah. And if you don't think about what they're thinking about you, eventually it all dies down and they stop thinking about me as a girl. And I was just Elissa. I was just one of the math majors.
Right.
And there were there weren't a lot of math majors, but there was a group of math majors, and I was just one of the math majors. And they didn't think of me as a girl, and I didn't think of them as potential dates or husbands or anything. And
so you reach this stage, right? It's a more normal, like camaraderie, like just a bunch of folks doing the same thing.
Because the converse is also true. If they're thinking about you as a girl, it's because they're wondering what you're thinking about them as a guy.
Yeah.
So
there's that whole dynamic. Yeah.
Yes. So if you're not feeding the cycle, if you're not feeding that dynamic, the dynamic dies out on its own. So they stopped being tense because they knew I wasn't rating them up against how they racked up against the political science majors or the basketball stars, and they weren't thinking about me as a potential cheerleader. So we all got along.
I think you give off this aura too, that you're pleasant to talk to, you're about the work, you're serious. And I think people pick that up, and I think that helped. What I'm most struck with, though, is at that age that you were able to not care about what they thought about you, because I was pretty much a wreck at that age. I did care what people thought about me.
My grandmother used to say, I made up my mind it wasn't going to bother me, and it didn't.
I love that.
Which is an incredible feat of fortitude. So I used to say, I made up my mind it wasn't going to bother me. And after a while, it did.
Oh, after a while.
So I always knew, even first grade, second grade, third grade, kindergarten, I knew that my mother not seeing me shouldn't bother me. And I was going to have to work at that. I knew that being picked on in third grade or being made to sit by myself in third grade because I was a Jew and might contaminate the other students.
No way.
I knew that shouldn't bother. Oh, whole other story. I knew that got sent to the principal's office for that one. I knew that shouldn't bother me. But I also knew I was going to have to work on it. And my grandmother would say, don't let it bother, just put it out of your mind. And it was like meditation. Every time a bad thought like that comes into your head, just put it out of your mind. And after a while, it won't bother you. And same thing. I was nervous going into my first math classrooms, and I was nervous, and I kind of slid in sideways. But I tried not to take it home with me every night, and I worked on it. So was I really good at it when I was a freshman in college? No. Am I really good at it now? No. But I recognize that it's necessary, and I keep working on it. And when something happens that really bothers me, I absorb the lessons that I need to learn, and I try to Teflon the lessons that I need to shed. And I just keep reminding myself, I cannot let this bother me. I have to shed the bad. I have to keep the good, shed the bad.
I think your grandmother was pretty amazing. And I see such a determination in you that she modeled. And
Can I brag about my grandmother for a minute?
Sure.
Family. My grandmother was one of the first women mathematicians at Columbia.
No way.
She went to Barnard, but she got her master's from Columbia. She was Margaret Mead's statistician. She worked at the museum.
Way.
She was the mathematician. She was a staff mathematician at the Museum of Natural History, and she marched for suffrage. And she said, do you know how hard it is to march from 181st Street to Grand Army Plaza in high heels and a corset?
Oh my God. Right. That's not an insignificant march. So I had no idea. She used
to call me on election day and say, you are voting. I didn't march from 181st Street, so you could stay home.
Good for her. She sounds wonderful. So yeah, that tells a lot about, that says to me where you get a lot of your strength, and you're just that she told you, like, you're going to have to try this. You're going to have to just not let this bother you. And I was struck while you were talking with the fact that I did not have that push from outside to make me stronger. I didn't have that. So I went to an all-women's
if you don't have
college.
you don't have a pole star. If you
Yeah.
don't have a North Star to head to, a role model, it is, and a role model you can poke, that
Yeah.
then it's so hard. And a role model that you can ask questions, and a role
Yeah.
model you can talk to. But more than that, a role model who has flaws. My
Yeah.
grandmother and my aunt Alice was a bacteriologist
Wow.
from Barnard. She worked for Jonas Salk. She working on the
Wow.
polio vaccine. She was Jonas Salk's technician, and neither one of them could cook worth a damn. So having role models who are human is so. There was never this sense in my life of I can't be that. There was always the sense of I can learn to be a skilled math engineer. I don't have to learn how to cook too.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have to be Superwoman. I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to be sexy. I have to be a good person. But if I choose to be an engineer, not a I don't know what, ballerina, that's okay. That's okay.
That's so cool. I had a bunch of strong women in my family, but what I was picking up on was when you walked into that classroom as the only woman, as a young girl, like when you were a freshman, like I never had that. I think that when you're going up against something, it's when you develop that strength, I think. And I was kind of like coddled in comparison. I was coddled. Like I went to an all women's college, I just avoided that whole thing. It's like, oddly enough, I was also pre-med. I was pre-med for a hot minute.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I just said, I'm not ready for these courses and this ridiculous amount of studying. And I just wasn't in that place. Yeah. I mean, I did work at a hospital. I was a candy striper and I worked in the kitchen, and
I didn't even get that far.
I don't really mind like messy. I have that part of my personality, but I totally hear you about, it's almost too much though. I was like, no, I don't think I could have like that objectivity that doctors have to have. Yeah, I don't have that. I'm a mess. Yeah. Like, I'm just like,
it's truly, what you said is absolutely right. You develop muscles by using them, not by planning to use them. It's actually one of the themes of my second novel, is you develop strength by acting, by you develop muscles by using them. Yeah. You don't develop strength and then go out and be strong. You get strong by standing up for yourself.
So when there's those negative influences, when there's something pushing on you, it's a spiritual belief too, that's, you almost think that later in your life, you look back and say, I'm grateful for that because I became this. So tell me about the beginning of your career. Like, did you start at Bell Labs?
I did. I started at Bell Labs. I left for a variety of reasons and bounced around the world a little and then went back to school. But I did. I started at Bell Labs, and I would have to say it was the same kind of thing. There were a lot of times where I walked into a room and I was the only woman in the room. Honestly, it was just more of the same. It was just like being in college for a while, at least. It was just like being in college. There were more women around. I was in a programming. They were recruiting programmers like mad, and they were recruiting mathematicians. Some mathematicians, they were recruiting developers. So even though there were only 2 women in the math department, there were a lot. We were right up against the coding, all the coders, and there were a lot of women coders, and that was really nice. So cool. I have to say, when I started at Bell Labs, there was it was funny. When I started at Bell Labs, the signs on the bathrooms said men's room and secretary's lounge. Yeah. So we're talking
Yeah.
the Stone Age here, but they were starting to
It
bring
was
in
starting
a
to
lot of
change.
women. It was starting to change. Yes.
What an
Yes.
exciting time to be there, and you saw the turnover,
Yes.
and you
Yeah.
were part of something new. There you
Yes.
were.
Yep. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So tell me about leaving and going to Australia.
Oh, well, at some point I realized as much as I loved math, and the job was okay. So, what would I tell young women entering the workforce today? What would I tell anybody entering the workforce today? Which is be prepared for the fact that all your life you've had very short term, very finite goals. You've had homework assignments, you've had semesters, you've had final exams at the end of every semester, you've had homework, you've had term papers due, and everything comes with 2, 3, 4 week, 8 week deadlines. Even a doctorate, master's thesis is a 6-month project, and a doctorate is 2 years of coursework and 2 years of writing a term paper. And then you get to the working world, and your life basically is you are 21 or 22, and when you're 69 and a half, you can retire, or 59 and a half. And you stop and you go, that's like 38 years from now. I don't have a goal. My next goal is retire, and the goal after that is die. And I kind of had an existential, a midlife crisis, an existential crisis that what had nothing to do with Bell Labs, and it had nothing to do with my work, and it had everything to do with the fact that I just had this whole life open to me, and no way, nothing anchoring it. And so I kind of imploded. And I had always wanted, I wanted to go to Australia. I scuba dive. I love diving. I wanted to fly away. And so I quit my job at Bell Laboratories, and I went to a travel agent. In those days, you couldn't get tickets online. And I got a ticket for Australia, leaving 10 days later. So I scrambled to get a passport and a visa, and I had to go through New Zealand. So I had to get 2 visas and pack stuff up and get myself over to Australia, where I meandered my way up to an industrial fishing town, city called Cairns. And I worked as an illegal alien. I worked without working papers. I was a cook on a prawn trawler. I was a bartender in a strip joint. I
didn't know all this.
I was an underwater camera model for an Italian film crew.
Wow.
I was a dive assistant. I was a typist for an oceanographic research facility. I basically was anything. I scrubbed hulls.
Oh my gosh!
Basically anything that I could do. Family issues led me to come home. And once I came home, I went back to school. I went back to Rutgers for my grad work, and I met my husband. And, as things do, I was planning to go back to Australia, but then I met a guy. So, what are you going to do about that, right?
And you're still with that guy. So
I'm still with that guy, and he still loves New Jersey. So what are you going to do?
That's so nice, though. That's a great story. Now, tell me just a little bit about how does one become, or what led to becoming, an underwater model?
It's just like
I can't let that one go. Yeah, I just have to know.
It's kind of just like anything else. I was the only one that fit into the white sweatsuit. It's how anything in this world happens. You are just,
you're there.
Like all modeling, I fit into the costume. And that was it. This Italian film crew had come to Australia to do a whole bunch of filming, and they didn't bring a model with them. They figured that was too expensive, but they brought the white wetsuit, and they basically walked around.
Can you wear this? Can you wear this?
Yeah. So that's what I did. I slithered into the white wetsuit, and I put on the white face mask, and I had a white tank and white booties and white fins. And I basically swam around, and I held my breath when they told me to hold my breath. I mean, it was just like a regular modeling gig. And they would signal to me, turn this way, turn that way, look up, look down, stop breathing, because the bubbles make things crazy. And I did a really good job because I can actually breath hold for quite a while. And we weren't very deep because they need the light.
You were good for that, yeah.
And I would sit under the lights, and I had hooks on my weight belt. So I had a lot of weight on, and I had hooks on my weight belt so that I could anchor myself and the current wouldn't drag me anywhere. And that's what I did.
You were perfect for that. I mean, honestly, they couldn't use just anybody. You had to be comfortable underwater and have some scuba diving training.
Oh, you had to be a diver. I mean, there was no question that there was no way for anybody who wasn't even an experienced diver. Novice divers thrash a lot. And when you thrash, you stir up the water and you scare off the fish and you damage the coral. And they needed somebody who was an experienced diver who basically could just put on a weight belt and just sink to the bottom and sit there. And the flip side was you had to be down there for as long as you had to be down there, which meant you had to do recovery stops, safety stops going up, and sometimes hanging on a knot, doing a safety stop for 93 minutes was boring. It was boring. You write stories in your head.
Well, you do.
you play chess games in your head. Yeah, it's what you do when you're bored.
True. So on to Rutgers. What class or where did you meet Kim, your husband?
I won him at a poker game. I was in the comp sci department because the mathematical computing majors, the mathematical computing dissertation was out of comp sci, not out of math. And one of the other computer science students, who, by the way, works at Bell Labs to this day, had used to host poker games. And he lived in grad student housing, and we all trucked over to his house one night we all rotated hosting the poker games. And we trucked over to his grad student apartment suite, and his new roommate, who was a postdoc from England, walked through the room. He didn't even come to play, which is just as well, because he sucks at cards. He truly does. Taking his money is embarrassing. It's embarrassing to do it because it's so easy. So he just walked through, and I thought, oh, he's pretty. He's pretty. I like him. And he has pretty eyes. I did. He has pretty eyes. And that's how we met.
I love that.
Yeah.
So you went to Rutgers and you majored in comp sci, but it was really math, right? Mathematical.
It was numerical analysis, computational mathematics.
Mathematics. And then did you go back to Bell Labs?
And then when I was there, then I went back to Bell Labs. And at that point, I was ready to work. Two things had happened. One is I had my time out in the world, being crazy, being a diver, being an underwater model in a white wetsuit.
You had your adventures, yes.
I'd had my adventures, and I'd also had enough breathing room to recognize that work wasn't about nothing here until I retire and then I die. That work really did consist of identifying the program I'm working on, identifying and really committing to how does this make the team stronger, the project stronger, the company stronger, where do my skills need to be improved? Where do the team skills need to be improved? Where can I contribute most to the team? Where can I contribute most to other people? And so I learned how to make my own 6-month plans, which I hadn't been able to do when I got there the first time, because all the plans had always been handed to me. Here's your homework assignment. Here's your dissertation topic. Here's your next homework assignment. Here's your final exam schedule. Mm-hmm. I had learned how to make my own schedule, my own assignments, my own goals and objectives.
That's huge. And I don't think we don't warn young people about what that feels like. I think that's such a great point that you're passing on, that, and I never thought of it in quite that way, but it's true. It's like you're turned loose and you're just expected to take this job and make your own schedule. Yeah. But I love hearing that you just said, well, I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to get more. I notice people do well when they get absorbed into the work and find their purpose at work. It's really important to get that handle on, why am I here? What do I contribute? How can I get better? And just make that long-term commitment. But I love how you decided I'm going to do 6-month intervals. I'm going to sort of know what I have to do in the next 10 months.
And find out what satisfies you. As I said, I like getting things right. That's what makes me tick. But also what makes me tick is that has to have a purpose. Well, honestly, solving equations just to solve equations and get them right, let's face it, that has no purpose. But it might have a purpose for somebody else. It has no purpose for me. So I looked for jobs where I could solve somebody else's equations. I was not happy for the minute and a half that I was in the theoretical math department, but in the computational math department, yeah. So I looked for other people's problems to solve. The physicists came to me and said, I have this theoretical physics wave propagation model, and I would say, I can write the code, I can solve the equations, I can develop the equations, I can develop the model, I can solve the equations, and then I can write the code that'll put this on the computer so that the computer can extrapolate it to the massive amount of results that you need. And so what I like getting things right, and I liked helping other people with their problems, because I don't anchor a lot of what I do in reality, but other people do, so I can help them.
Yeah.
I can help them get it right. And
you're a true team player. You're supportive and you enjoy that part.
You always think everything sounds so nice.
No, but it's true. I've seen you in action.
No, I'm strictly in it for the selfish point of view. Helping other people makes me feel good. And it's really, it's all about me. Let's face it. The whole universe, it's all about me. So
you have those social skills. I mean, not to be stereotypical, but not a lot of math majors have tons of social skills. That's what they say about tech writers too. Not a lot of tech writers have, a lot of social skills. So we have that for some reason. And I love that you said that you discovered that about yourself. You know what? I thought of something totally unrelated, but I realized in the last decade of my life that I like to cook, and it's very much like a chemistry thing. I like to bake. I like to measure exactly. And I love to have that thing come out, so to me, that was really cool that I realized that, but I like to cook too, but I don't really just like to cook in isolation. What I like to do is cook. I enjoy the process. And then I love to feed people. If I'm not feeding people, it's not as much fun. So you reminded me of that.
Right. Right. Oh, here's a stereotypical thing. Somebody once said to me, Engineers love to make layer cakes. Can I tell you? I love to make layer cakes. I've even done the layer cake where the layers are vertical.
Yeah.
And that is an engineering feat.
Yes.
Although the result is just the layers are vertical. So when you take a slice out and you take a photograph of the cake with the slice out, it looks seriously cool. But you take the slice out and you lay it down on a plate and it just looks like a piece of layer cake.
Just a layer cake.
It's, yeah,
cool.
Once you lay the slice down, it's just layer cake.
Now,
engineers like to make layer cakes.
They do. And I think that's so interesting how people, you can see what people are about, how their brains work, what they like. And I notice you like knitting, which is also kind of programming. Yep. It's like, I like weaving, and I found it very, very much like programming. I like gadgets. I like looms and programming the pattern. And it's just weird how our brains work.
Yes.
All right. So you're there, and it's wonderful that you got to go back, and you've got like a purpose. And so that was good, right? You have any interesting stories about, did you have any funny things happen, or any like kind of?
Well, I know that I know you're planning to do a series of interviews and then kind of a joint interview. And I know that one of the people on the joint interview is going to bring this up because it was the thing that people knew about me, I think, for a very long time, was my weird jewelry. And my weird jewelry, like my mismatched earrings, actually has a story. So I'll tell you this story, which is at one point in one assignment that I had, which was to supervise the development group over in AT&T's 800 number and calling plan software system. And it was huge and it was massive and it was stressful. And my boss was the worst. He was the second worst boss I ever had.
Oh my gosh.
And he once sat me down very early on because I dressed the way we dressed at Bell Labs, which was tended to be black chinos or black slacks with an Oxford shirt and a blazer. And he sat me down and he gave me a Dress for Success lecture. And the Dress for Success lecture, and this was the 90s, the 80s, the 90s, a navy blue suit or a maroon suit with a white shirt and a string tie. In other words, it was like the IBM manual from 40 years for women for 40 years before. It was 40 years out of date. And he had found it somewhere and thought this was a good idea. And I was the first woman manager he'd ever hired or managed, and it was a disaster. But I stuck it out. I stuck it out for as long as you need, until I got till the software was done. So he gave me this Dress for Success lecture. So I went out and bought a navy blue suit. Can I tell you how long it took me to find a maroon suit and white shirts? I didn't go for the string tie.
Oh, good.
But then I used to do weird things with my jewelry. Like I got this gorgeous ruby and gold and crystal, like Swarovski crystal spider pin. And I put it on the back of my suit jacket. And I got this silver and crystal marcasite lizard that I put in the breast pocket of my navy blue suit so that the lizard was climbing out of my pocket. Or I'd have it climbing out of my side pocket. And I started wearing earrings that weren't symmetrical. They went together, but they weren't symmetrical, like a moon and a star. Or I have one which is a palm tree out of beaten gold, and then the other side is the square that the palm tree was cut out of, or a diamond and a square, or dangly earrings that were like a diamond, a square, a square, a circle, and a triangle. And on the other side, they were in a different order. And he used to, when he thought I wasn't looking, he used to like stare at me because he just couldn't figure out what was wrong. Like, I was doing what I was told. I was wearing what I was told. I was wearing that navy blue suit and the white shirt and not the string tie. But something was wrong and he just couldn't figure out what.
I love it.
Oh, I'm telling you.
I love it.
Oh, the man was a moron. So, but I loved wearing the mismatched earrings, the asymmetrical earrings. And so when I got to Liberty, when I got to my next job, I took all the mismatched earrings with me. And I do know that that's what people used to say. Oh, there goes Elissa and her weird earrings.
But it's really fun when people can connect to something and see the fun side of your personality. They feel like they know you and they enjoy it. So I love that you did that. I mean, the origin wasn't to, entertain people. The origin was to annoy and confuse your boss, which I love.
Yes.
But yes, it kills me that they thought they could tell you how to dress. I mean, the company can, if there's a dress code, but an individual boss, that's kind of crazy, right?
Oh, this boss was so terrible. We went on he actually hired me because, and I will say to anybody listening to this didn't happen a lot, honestly, but it did happen. And it doesn't happen as much anymore, but it still happens.
That's a good point.
I was hired by this guy because his boss told him he had to hire a woman and he had to hire an Asian. So he hired me and he hired a Chinese guy. And he hired me. I had put my resume in. And then I didn't hear and I didn't hear and I didn't hear. And I thought this was a job I really wanted. So I called him and he hired me over the phone. And he hired me because I was the first woman who actually followed up on my resume. And
you fit in the slot. Yeah.
And as far as he was concerned, my qualifications had nothing to do with my resume. My qualifications were I had tits. And
there you go.
I said that once to the other supervisors, who, by the way, were wonderful. And the Chinese guy said, "Hey," he said, at least you have big tits. He said, "I have slanty eyes."
Oh my gosh.
He got hired because he had little slanty eyes.
So yeah, it was still happening. It was weird.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
I told this
Although
story.
He was an exception. I have to say he was
good.
Old school, and he was the old exception. And I still hear it a little bit now and then. I got on a call. I was the only woman on the Zoom call, as I often am, because I work for a defense contractor and an engineering firm. And one of the people got on and said something along the lines of, "Oh, Elissa's here to take notes. We can get started." And my boss said, "Dr. Matthews is not here to take notes."
I love it. Oh
yes.
My gosh, I love it.
Yep.
So yeah, that's cool. It's interesting. Yeah. You're reminding me, my husband works at the same general arsenal.
Yeah, he's right down the road and he won't work for us.
And he noticed somebody from the South, and I love people from the South, but this person happened to be kind of old school from the South. And he came up, one of their, I get confused because there's so many levels of management, but he was, a SME. And he came up, a subject matter expert, and he started massaging this woman's shoulders while he was talking to her. And my husband's like, "What the heck are you doing?" It's like, just stop it. And also said some really interesting things, like knocking New Jersey, like those old fashioned things that people say sometimes from another part of the country.
Yes.
But what I loved is, the woman just froze up and moved away, and the men just rolled their eyes. So I think what you're saying is it gets nipped in the bud faster now.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
But it still does happen. It still does happen.
It does happen. And it happens in more subtle ways that you can't quite put your finger on. Like just today, somebody was talking about, some work that we're finishing up. It's just getting packaged. And in my, I would say we're packaging it up. We're just doing the final formatting. We're making sure all the piece parts are there. And then we're going to submit the package. And he said, we're just putting the lipstick and makeup on and rolling up our stockings and putting on our shoes, putting on our high heels. Yeah, I don't know if I should be insulted, because the flip side of it is, if somebody were to say to me, guys are entitled to wear lipstick and mascara and high heels, I couldn't argue with that.
Well, I get his point. Yeah, it's just a little odd, right? It's a little odd.
It was odd, and it just showed the mentality that if it had been the old days, he would have said something much more offensive.
I think so.
He's cleaned up his act, and he thinks this is okay. And I'm not sure I could.
It's on the edge. Yeah, I think it's on the edge. Yeah, it's like in that weird middle place. It's funny. I've been told recently, like within the last couple of years, just make it pretty. You're here to make it pretty. I make a lot of money. I'm a senior tech writer. I don't just make things pretty. I understand the material. I go to your meetings. I'm almost like a subject matter expert. Just make it pretty.
Right. Yeah. And yes. And I often say, if you just want somebody to make it pretty, I'll assign my junior writer to it. Do you want somebody who's going to edit the content?
Yeah. And think about do you want an engineer who's going to evaluate the content, or you just want somebody to make it pretty? You just want pretty pictures. I'll put my junior writer on it. But it just it's really not about us. It reveals their ignorance about what we do. Now, here's an interesting question. I went from being a tech writer to being a systems engineer. And I noticed that people respected me and treated me differently from the minute I had that title. Now, I know it's different now. Tech writers are treated much more seriously. I've seen a big change. But did you feel a slight, would they have said that to you if you were a systems engineer? Did you feel a slight drop now that your title is?
Absolutely. There's still a hierarchy. There's absolutely still a hierarchy of ranks. But honestly, there's a hierarchy of ranks in any field. There are tech writers who used to be mathematicians. There are very bright tech writers. There are very dumb programmers who will never be higher than coder. But as a general rule,
yes,
the coder is considered a more agile, flexible, and upwardly mobile career path than a tech writer.
It's true.
A tech writer receives information. They don't generate their own information. They don't generate their own equations. They don't generate their own work product. They consolidate, aggregate.
They collaborate.
Other people's, but they aggregate other people's work product. Can they be very skilled? Yes. Can they be very? Yes. But in terms of the hierarchy, it's generally considered less.
I do generate now. I do. I know things well enough to generate, but I get what you're saying. And I have to say, when I worked at iConnective, there was my bunch of systems engineers. They were all women, and they had a male boss. And for the first time, ever, I was treated like they're equal, with total respect, because all of us had 20 to 25 years in telecom. So almost all of us were SMEs. So they would work in concert with me. And it was such a cool experience, because we had to do lots of software features. We had to, describe a whole new interface. We had to know, in a deep way, service provider stuff and endless terms that only telecom people know, and that depth of knowledge and those questions that you ask when you know it well. And it really was a great experience, because I, after a while, was considered one of the SMEs, and people would say, hey, do you know about this? But that's just unusual. And that was more collaborative, but that was fun. Anyway, just very interesting, the perceptions. And also, it's not just the perception of you as the woman on the call, but the tech writer. I've often been asked to take notes, because that's what writers do. But I really don't mind that because I learn a lot as I'm writing, and it's the meeting notes. You know what I mean?
I don't mind taking notes at all. And I will volunteer to take notes because as you know, he who writes the notes writes the history.
Oh, I love it.
He who writes the notes gets to assign the action items. But I do very much mind getting told to take notes unless it's going around.
Yes.
Or having it be assumed that I will take the notes because I've got the tits.
Because we said the F word at one point, but that's okay.
We did.
I think people will be okay with it. So you've had a really cool career. I'm admiring like all the amazing roles you've had, and now you're here in a slightly different role. You're still running things. You use a lot of your skills. What does it feel like to be in that different sphere? Like you're doing the writing, technical communicating, you're managing people who write, you're putting together contracts, your bids.
It's broader. It's less intellectually challenging. Don't let my boss hear you say that. It's more work. It's more consistent work. It's challenging in a different way in that there's so many more piece parts that you have to keep track of than when you're writing a piece of code, solving an equation, writing a mathematical model, or even supervising a development group or a design supervising an architecture team. Proposals and documents, and there's just so much, and in contracts and engagements, there's just so much more going on. And there's so many more balls in the air, so many more plates to juggle.
Yeah.
That is a new skill, a challenging skill for me. This job is much more challenging, even though it's not as intellectually driven as some of the other work I've done.
So it does keep you engaged. Yeah.
Yes, it's not as it's engaging and it's challenging. It's not as intellectually depth driven,
right,
as other jobs I've had. But it's a hoot. It's fun. I am enjoying it.
See, that's the most important thing. Especially, we're going to retire in a couple of years probably, and want to have fun.
Yeah. To some degree, I've always said that about my job, my work. Am I enjoying this? I have been lucky enough to never be in a position where I had to keep a job. That when I wanted to leave and go to Australia, I knew, and the economy supported me getting piecework here, there, and everywhere, enough to keep myself alive. And by the time I had kids that I had to worry about feeding and putting shoes and college funds together, I had enough skills under my belt that if I got completely fed up at Bell Labs, I knew I could take my resume and walk down the road to Philips Van Heusen and get an absolutely equivalent, or Ciba-Geigy or any of the pharmaceuticals, and get absolutely equivalent programming job at any. It wasn't the case where it was the Depression and I was working at a factory, at a sardine canning plant in Wayne, Alaska. And it was the only game in town and I had 3 kids to raise. So I was never trapped at work. I always had the luxury, the delightful luxury of knowing that I could quit whenever I wanted, so that I bounced around jobs quite comfortably because I knew I could always find another one.
And that's a wonderful thing. Now,
that is a wonderful gift to
having the kids
have in life.
I didn't even ask about the kids. How did that work? The balance, the work-life balance, the kids.
I'll tell you, when my first child was born, I went to part-time hours. And I stayed home with my first son for about 6 months. And then I went to part-time. I worked school bus hours. So he went to daycare and he was at a short daycare, just kind of like dropped him late, picked him up a little early. But when he started school, I went to school bus hours and I dropped him in the bus. Then I went to work and at 10 minutes to, 4 minutes after 3, I would packed up my desk and I walked out and I was at the bus stop at 20 after 3. And that was great. That was the best of both worlds. And I worked 5 short days, and that stopped when the economy tanked in 2000 or 2001, whenever it was, when the economy tanked. My boss at the time came to me and said, we're making a list. We're making lists. She said, there's no such thing as a good list. She said, you're part-time, get your name off the list. So I switched over to full-time, which I didn't love as much. But on the other hand, by the time that rolled around, Graham was in daycare and that was fine. And then, then I came back to Murray Hill and then he was in school. It was a little bit of juggling, but my big guy was already in high school and he didn't need parenting. And my little guy was in lower school. And, so it was a little bit of juggling. But I didn't have to do it for many, many, many years.
And you and Kim weren't far away. Like you didn't.
Yeah. The juggling was really only like 2000 to 2000 and whatever till he went to middle school because of the economy. Just because I had to hang on to. Well, there you go again. I didn't have to hang on to the job at Bell Labs. I could have found a part-time job somewhere else. But the economy...
You wanted to stay, yeah.
I wanted to stay, and the economy was sucky. I mean...
It was.
I would have been given the same problems about being part-time at Phillips Van Heusen or Colgate that I was at Bell Labs. And so it was worth, it was necessary to make the full-time thing work.
So you made it work.
I only had one child. And the other thing was Ian was in high school at the time. When worst came to worst, and I had to do something, I would say, Ian, take care of your baby brother. He was old enough to legally babysit, be on his own and babysit. Yeah. He didn't like it. He didn't like it. It wasn't always my choice, but I didn't, it was not a difficult situation where I was a single parent with 3 kids under the age of 5.
You do become aware of how fortunate we are. And that's a wonderful thing to just notice, I know not everybody has it like this.
Yes.
And that's really cool.
Yeah. I mean, juggling work and home life that's not a question I'm really qualified to answer. I never really had to do it. Yeah. Yeah, find somebody who dealt with that.
Well, I think that is a wrap. I loved hearing things about you. I've known you for a long time and I didn't know these things. So that was fun for me. And I think it's really interesting for especially younger women to hear what your journey's been like and to hear that advice that you gave. It's very good advice.
Thank you. We'll remember, other people's stories about you are not always true.
Yeah.
Sometimes they are, sometimes they are. Learn from them. Sometimes they're not. Shed them and fuck them if they can't take a joke.
And I know we will be treated to more of your...
Yeah. Find somebody who dealt with that.
Well, I think that is a wrap. I loved hearing things about you. I've known you for a long time and I didn't know these things. So that was fun for me. And I think it's really interesting for especially younger women to hear what your journey's been like and to hear that advice that you gave. It's very good advice.
Thank you. Remember, other people's stories about you are not always true.
Yeah.
Sometimes they are, sometimes they are. Learn from them. Sometimes they're not. Shed them and fuck them if they can't take a joke.
And I know we will be treated to more of your liveliness when we have our group interview at the end of our series. I'm looking forward to that a lot.
Oh, that's going to be fun. Get the band back together.
Old times, yes.
The old timers.
Okay.
In Yiddish, the expression is "afterkaka," which means old farts.
Oh my God, I love it. So in the show notes,
In
I'm going to put.
We even have an expression that means old farts.
I love it. So in the show notes for this episode, I'm going to put your contact info. And if we can have a link to your writing or something, anything you want to include, let us know. And I'll put that in there. It would be great if people could get in touch with you and read some of the things.
Yes, absolutely. www.epmatthews.com.
I love it.
2 T's in Matthews.
Excellent.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was fun.